see you standing there. You're rather slight on your feet there, friend. Now that you're here, why don't you take a seat? I was just about to go on my way to discuss an ever so brief history of psychedelic rock. Would you care to join? Excellent. It's a rather juicy topic, so I'll try to stick to the meat and potatoes of it. You can consider yourself one of us now, friend. Anyhow, no need to lollygag. Let's make haste, we've got a lot to talk about. Psychedelic rock emerged at a tumultuous time in history. The 60s were the height of the civil rights movement in America.
Face the difficulties of today and tomorrow. I still have a dream.
And some of the biggest flare-ups in the Cold War transpired during this time. People were starting to question the validity of military presence in Vietnam, as it had become long and drawn out. Man had also managed to take his first steps on the moon. Times were changing. The ideals and values that had previously been taken for granted for so many years previously were suddenly all being questioned. As a consequence of the baby boom, there was an overwhelmingly large demographic of young people. Enough of these young people wanted to set themselves apart from the mainstream great plastic society that they ended up forging entire countercultures themselves. They were against convention, authority, materialism, war, and hate. This community of individuals was, however, for love. Hence, they became known as the love children, or the hippies. The hippies primarily wanted to achieve an alternate way of living and being and interacting with the world. Ergo, they went on a quest to experience an alternate state of mind. This, however, was the catalyst in much of the negative stigma that surrounds the hippie lifestyle. Their elders and more straight-laced counterparts saw them as lemmings that experimented with recreational drugs. Among them, natural hallucinogens such as marijuana and magical mushrooms, and the chemically concocted lysergic acid diethylamide. LSD, a drug that had risen to popularity in the late 60s, was thought to be potentially genetically and psychologically harmful. By some, however, it was thought to provide spiritual uplift and mental clarity. LSD was considered by many the sacrament in this new religion of love and freedom. The hippies were an incredibly intellectual and innovative group of individuals. Iconic artwork and poetry and literature came out of this time. The music, however, was absolutely spectacular. It had this floaty, bled together quality that no other music really had before this. It was meant sort of to replicate or enhance the feelings or emotions that one would experience when tripping on acid. Psychedelic rock is a combination of this genre of music and the contemporary rock of the time, and many of the elements of run-of-the-mill 60s, early 70s rock can be easily, overtly noticed in psychedelic rock. Whilst conjuring up any genre of music, an integral ingredient is, of course, the instrumentation. Psychedelic rock is no exception, as it requires quite a plethora of instruments to achieve that otherworldly sound. First to be mentioned, deservedly, is the electric guitar. Although more often than not it was heavily distorted and sustained. Distortion was achieved by means of a fuzz box or some other sort of sound accessory. The particular example just shown was a Fender Stratocaster that would have been extremely prevalent during the time. Jimi Hendrix had a very similar guitar, as did Jeff Beck and Buddy Holly, if I'm not mistaken. Psychedelic rock was also extremely keyboard heavy. That was the CS-80 Yamaha. Also, more novel instruments, such as the electric organ and the electric harp, were often used to give it a kind of idiosyncratic vibe. Recording was rapidly becoming a sophisticated ordeal. Sound alteration was new and high-tech and therefore all the rage in many different genres of music. Spring reverberation, which is more commonly heard in surf rock, and the wah-wah were two means of going about this out of several. The wah-wah gives the electric guitar sort of a whiny characteristic, almost mimicking a human voice, and was very, very common in psychedelic rock. The wah pedal is the descendants of a device that had been used since the 1920s on brass instruments to give them a similar sort of vibe. It really does give a completely different flavor to the sound of the guitar, and people got super excited about it. If you want to imagine how it sounds, think 70s porno, or Jimi Hendrix, who seems to keep coming up, or just give it a listen. Crybaby, which was one of the biggest manufacturers of wah-wah pedals, and I think is rather suitably named, considering the sound. Their slogan was, "Put your foot down and be heard," which I think is absolutely relevant to what we're talking about. Psychedelic rock was often riddled with political content. It became an outlet for protest against decisions that the government had dictated or societal values that were a displeasure to the psychedelic crowd. These jabs, we'll call them, were sometimes presented awfully obscurely and metaphorically, and were often completely nonsensical. As may have been insinuated earlier, the genre is also full of drug references, indirect and direct, and there didn't seem to be a particular preference for the sort of voice that you'd find in psychedelic rock, although almost consistently the vocals were very indiscriminate and muffled and echoey, as if you were being spoken to from a dream, and I believe that. The psychedelic phenomenon was unfolding in the UK and the US almost simultaneously. A lot of the influence, however, can be attributed to the East. It's a rather worldly genre, actually. I'm sure we're all familiar with George Harrison's romp over to India to go and learn how to play the sitar. Psychedelic rock featured numerous different flutes from around the globe, and the tabla, which is once again from India, and even the didgeridoo at one point or another. It's a rather versatile genre, which is why it's a little bit hard to know when it starts and when it begins. It's rather foggy, if you will. I had a difficult time finding a song that would illustrate all of the aspects of psychedelic rock, and I swear that not one exists, or there is not one that exists. I feel like I should honorably mention the Beatles and their dabbling in psychedelic rock, because they had produced some amazing things, and also Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, all of these super famous mainstream artists were all jumping on the psych rock bandwagon. Jefferson Airplane, another wonderful example, and the Grateful Dead, The Doors. I could have chosen to do any of these bands. I ended up going for Time of the Season by the Zombies, just because it's one of my personal favorites. And sadly, it doesn't actually demonstrate the wah-wah and how it's used alongside the electric guitar, and in retrospect, I wish I had spoken a little bit more about the electric organ, because there's a fabulous solo, and so give it a listen. I did my best to dissect it, although and it is not my realm of expertise, but it has been a pleasure speaking to you about psychedelic rock. And enjoy your evening. Have a groovy night.
It's the time of the season when love runs high. In this time, give it to me easy and let me try with pleasured hands to take you in the sun to promised lands, to show you everyone. It's the time of the season for loving. What's your name? What's your name? Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? He is he rich like me? Has he take part any time to show you what you need to live? Tell it to me slowly. Tell you why I really wanna know. It's the time of the season for loving. What's your name? Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? He is he rich like me? Has he taken